Bonjour, bonjour. Welcome to this evening's webinar. It is so delightful to be here with you all. And in particular, it is wonderful and delightful to be able to welcome back our very favored Dr. Varden. We're so glad that things are resolved and that you're back with us this evening. You were very missed last night.
Well, I do appreciate everyone's thoughts and prayers that were sent. And yes, thank you. Everything has been resolved enough. And I heard you did one heck of a bang up job last night. Thank you for holding down the fort.
Oh,
Really.
avec plaisir. It's delightful. It's fun to engage. Like I know you echo this sentiment, but it's such a treat and a delight to be able to engage with our community, especially around topics that we get so passionate about and we see as such there's this potential in space here that people can do really tangible things to improve their health. And like, I don't know, that's just wonderful. That's just wonderful. And then we get to talk science while we're doing it. It's like nerd and heart stuff all together.
And I'm already seeing things up on the chat where they're from. We've got Jennifer from Toronto. That's your stump.
Bonjour, Madame.
But I got someone near me,
Mm.
Diana from New Hampshire, my neighbor state next door. Beautiful. Thank you so much for being here. Um,
Yeah. Welcome. Yeah. So we know what we're talking about this evening. Yesterday I forgot. And so welcome to everyone. I think it's great that I forgot because we're talking about memory. I think that's perfect. There's poetry in that.
and we got more from the Northeast. Wow, a whole bunch from Maine. Wonderful.
Oh, we have some wonderful connects here too, though. All right. All right. Do we have anyone outside of North America? Please. Yesterday we had New Zealand and Australia, and then I think there was somewhere we have Sydney back in the house. I love it. Hi, Robin.
Nice.
Okay. All right. So this evening, what we're going to be talking about is both genetic and lifestyle things that are going to influence cognitive wellness, cognitive abilities over the course of your life, and in particular, what happens as you age and what we can do to preserve that. I think, Lara, one of the bigger fears we hear from people, especially as we talk about getting older, is that loss of cognitive ability, that loss of effectively independence, right? To a certain extent, right? I know you hear that a lot in your practice.
I do. A lot of times, actually, a good majority of people are worried about losing their minds.
Mm.
I mean, and
Yeah.
I say that almost with a little bit of a joke because, it's like, oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. I can't remember. I put my car keys, I'm forgetting words and
Mm.
they may have family members that have had either some sort of cognitive decline, dementia, Alzheimer's, and they're worried. They
Mm.
want to check their genes. They want to see, am I going to go down that road? If you don't mind me sharing, my grandmother, actually,
Mm.
mother's mother, died from dementia. She was
Mm.
89 years old.
89.
Yeah, she was eight. Actually, she was exactly 89 and a half. My mother said, and my mother actually took care of her. Her mother, okay, lived in her home for almost 3 years, and she
Mm.
for her during those last years. But that decline was happening, and she was showing signs, years before that. I
Yeah.
mean, it's a scary thought. I mean, granted, my mother right now is 81 years old, sharp as a tack. So even genetically, there are ways that we can avoid, but there are things that we need to employ, that we need to do living a healthy life, things that we're going to be talking about tonight,
Mm.
that we can do to help avoid going down that path, even if we have a genetic predisposition, because it's something that I'm concerned about. Obviously, when you've got family members,
Yeah.
that and thinking, oh gosh, periodically when I can't think of words or I can't remember where I put things, or, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, am I getting Alzheimer's? Am I doing this?
Yeah.
So we have to be not jump to that nth degree, because there's so many aspects that can play a part in just not remembering words or not knowing
Mhm.
where you put your keys.
Yeah.
And I think we can touch
Mhm.
on that tonight as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love it. And I think what you're offering there, and that especially the sharing of your family and the witness that both you and your mother had to your grandmother's experience at end of life, which is especially for someone related to that experience who's watching it as an outsider, is really hard to watch because you've seen this very strong, vital person go into a state where you're caring for them. And I think that to a certain extent motivates a lot of people to coming into webinars like this, as well as coming into our offices. Not so much this, I want better memory per se, but I want to avoid what I saw. Right. And so I wonder, before we start diving into that, I want to share a story of a patient that I have. Um, and then while I'm doing that, I wonder if people can fill out our survey, in large part because we really want to make sure we're tailoring some of the advice and the consideration we're offering during this webinar to you. And so how old you are, do you have presentations of cognitive decline, et cetera, et cetera. All that is important. So if you want to fill out that survey, once I'm done my happy little story, we'll jump in and we'll understand who you are. Okay. Um, so uh, I think a lot of when we have conversations around memory and around getting older, I think that unfortunately a lot of them go into the fear-based, right? Like I said, you watched your grandmother, I watched my grandmother, right? There's elements of we watch this and there's this fear motivation. I want to offer a story of a patient from the opposite side of things. So one of my first practices, and I carry this client still within my private practice, it was an integrative clinic. And a fair portion of our patient base was older, right? The term we would endearingly use were Jerry's, meaning geriatric, but it was more of an endearing term. We'd call them Jerry's. And one of my favorite Jerrys, and I'll call him Jerry just for the sake of it all. He's a fellow who now is in his mid 80s. And I mean this with all the sincerity in the world. Um, this guy, mid 80s, looks honestly, if you saw him on the street, you'd probably say mid to late 60s. Like he does not look it. And the way he acts, honestly, he probably acts a little bit like he's in his 40s, even at moments, a little bit like he's a teenager. And I mean that with all the sincerity in the sense that the way he engages with life, every once in a while he'll call me and be like, sorry, Dr. Krista, I need to cancel the appointment. I'm currently in Spain. I'm like, why are you in Spain? He's like, I don't know. I just wanted to go. And it's the zeal with which he has life. And so every once in a while, I ask him the question of how do you do that? Like, is this purposeful? Is this just an accidental byproduct? Right. And I say this with awareness from a back end, from a clinical end. I know his genes, I know his blood work. There's nothing remarkable about him. If I had this pile of genetic work, he doesn't stand out as special. There's nothing unique in his genetic profile, right? His blood work is still really good and strong. I don't want to dismiss it. He still has really great blood work, so it indicates he is healthy. But when he talks about what he does in order to stay happy and healthy, the biggest part of what he's talking about, and I hope we can share this with you as we go through the presentation today, it's not per se a diet thing, it's not per se a genetic thing. He keeps his social circles strong, full, and varied, right? So strong and full, meaning he has a lot of social relationships, full, meaning he has several, like he has a lot of family, he has a lot of friends, but varied, also meaning his friend group, his primary peer group is not his 80 somethings. His primary peer group tends to be in and around 50. And a large part of that is because they're the people out going to Spain on the drop of a dime because why not? Right. So a huge part of that is his choice of I'm not going to act old. And from everything that I'm seeing, there's nothing remarkable in his genes. He's just choosing not to get old through his behavior and activity. Yeah. So I want to make sure we start off with the story of it doesn't have to be doom and gloom. There can be motivation towards in your mid 80s, you're going to Spain because. So just something to think of. Yeah. Dr. Lara, would you like to kind of dig into the chat and sorry, not the chat, but the poll and figure out who our audience is this evening.
I would love to if our angels in the background could pop that up. Beautiful.
There we
Thank
go.
you. So, our first question is what is your primary concern regarding cognitive health as you age? And wow, we actually have an almost three-way tie. Memory retention. So we were talking about that proactive aspect, preventing brain-related diseases, um, mental clarity and focus. Those really seem to be our top three. And then following behind general brain health maintenance. Of course,
Mm,
a lot of these interact so beautifully and overlap. Um,
mhm.
so let's see. Our second question, have you experienced any symptoms of cognitive decline or memory issues? And you know, overwhelmingly, yeah, almost 70% of you said, yeah, occasionally.
Well, we'll see.
I'm part of the I mean, yeah, it does happen. But we have just under 10% of you saying yes more frequently, and 25% of you, nope, not at all. Oh, that is fantastic. So whatever you're doing, obviously keep up, and maybe you could even throw some things in the chat that you have been doing. And
Yeah.
as far as like our age range for our audience, so we don't have anybody here 30 years old or younger, but we do have about equal amounts of people from like 31 to 50, 51 to 70, a smaller, a little bit higher amount, excuse me, in 51 to 65, but our largest group is actually that 65 and older. So glad you are here. Honestly, I think, as you were saying about your client, that for his age, that he has these varied friends and connections of all different ages.
Mhm,
That is so important.
mhm.
I do the same type of thing. And there has been research that has shown, interacting and learning and being friends with people who are younger with you, 20 years younger, even, keeping that vitality, getting like the newest information as far as their point of view, their lens in the world today, as well as those older. And here we have our wise, people who have been on this earth longer. That is
Yeah.
so important. Let's learn from their wisdom, from their experience, and have those discussions, kind of.
I'm so curious. Those who are over 65, if you don't mind just dropping in the chat how old you are for no other reason than yesterday we had someone who was, I forget if it was 81 or 83, but I want to see if we can beat that number. One day we're going to get a centenarian on here and then I'll
Oh,
do a dance of joy. But please let
oh,
us know how old you are. I want to know.
we've
It's
got Patricia at 75. We've got, yeah, those who are older than 65. So we've got
even
L
84 we just beat
at
yesterday.
74. Oh, soon 79. Oh, we've got 84. So we beat last night. Yes, we have two
There we
people,
go.
84 years old. Beautiful.
All
Wow.
right.
Some in their 60s. Wonderful.
Yeah.
So let's get to our last question. So
Mm,
this is
girl.
kind of like, where's
We have
Waldo?
to get to content soon, but yeah. And I'm avoiding this question on purpose because clearly.
You spot anything out of the ordinary behind either of the hosts. And so most of you didn't, but a few of you said yes. And I know that I saw a couple things dropped in the chat, and I know that our illustrious CEO has been saying,
No one has guessed it yet, doctors, but I'm going to give a prize to whoever guesses it first. So just throwing it out there.
Oh dear.
so that'll
I
be
will let you folk monitor the chat for that. All right. So from our 84-year-olds, and I think who Raymond was commenting, is he the youngest? Maybe. That's cool. I like it. I love it. We love the age range.
yeah.
Why don't we start digging into some of this? And for those, just before we do, for those that were on the webinar yesterday, there was a lot of questions around music as medicine. So at the very end of this, kind of before we all sign off, I'm going to offer a little bit of how music can be medicinal when it comes to preventing or maintaining and supporting cognitive function as we get older. Because I love that our audience loves music, and I will take any excuse to talk about neuroscience. So we will do that in a little bit. Yeah.
I want to throw in a couple of statistics when it
Please.
comes to brain health, but more specifically Alzheimer's. And these stats actually come from the Alzheimer's Association 2024 Facts and Figures report.
Mm,
And the one of the big statistics, which actually kind of in a way shocked me, how
mm,
much how more prevalent this is becoming, is that Alzheimer's disease is the fifth leading cause of death among people aged 65 and older.
mm,
Yeah, that number seems to be getting younger. I mean, again, even though my grandmother wasn't diagnosed specifically with Alzheimer's, it's still, you know, a cognitive decline, a dementia. But I mean, she was almost 90 years old, and
mhm.
here we've got, as low as 65. Um,
Yeah.
but the other thing, when you consider the cost, health and long-term care costs related to dementia, not just Alzheimer's, but dementia, are projected to reach $360 billion this year. Like, after this year's over, when they, tally up everything. And this number is expected to skyrocket to $1 trillion by 2050 without medical breakthroughs. I mean, that's shocking, the amount of money that's being put forth, but also to consider those caregivers taking care, of their family members, or those, with dementia. That puts an awful stress. I mean, I saw what my mom and dad went through and what they had to deal with. They needed to replenish, and it's difficult, you know.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's a marvel. It's a marvel. And so I think there's a service to not only yourself, but also your family if you're tending your cognitive health and well-being. Yeah, so let's dive into it here, Lara. Why don't we, I guess, maybe set the stage with things that you need to consider, health things that you need to consider um, when it comes to cognitive wellness. What are things that can kind of take away from it or add to it? And then we'll jump into some of the genes that found all of that. Is that fair? Do you like that?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So we have a list of 6 things right here. So the first thing that we're going to review, and I'm honestly going to give a little bit of a throwback to yesterday. We're not going to explore this too deeply, but one of the first things that you can focus on when you're thinking about both supporting and maintaining cognitive health and wellness and kind of preventing the effects of aging in that memory sense is going to be neuroplasticity. So we talked a lot about this yesterday, in particular, how brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF, plays into that. How BDNF is that miracle grow of your brain and different strategies and techniques to support that. So while I think that's a really important part of this conversation, we're going to ask the powers that be to put that into the chat so that you can refer to that and we can focus on other things this evening of considerations. Yeah, yeah. All right. All right, Dr. Varden, I'm calling you by your government right now so that we can put on the nerd, do the nerd lifting. Why don't we talk a little bit about inflammation, neural inflammation, and some things that are happening within the brain to keep the brain clean and what happens when those mechanisms, those cells, et cetera, start to fail. Yeah.
Well, I mean, considering that, especially when you have chronic low-grade inflammation, okay, a lot of times, actually, the buzzword that's used for that is called inflammaging, and that's often associated with cognitive decline, especially in older adults. Um, the microglia. So this is the brain's immune cells, and they are and have been increasingly studied for their dual role in promoting health, especially with neural function and contributing to neuroinflammation. So it's it's important to consider that we need to target um, looking at microglia dysfunction, reducing inflammation through lifestyle changes, through things like good sleep, because it is during sleep, especially deep sleep, that these the glial cells actually shrink
So
up
close.
60% of their size, and allows like cleaning, of all the junk in the brain, and that clearance of that. Actually, this was discussed in Dr. Matthew Walker's book, Why We Sleep,
Mm.
looking at these studies. And, because, yeah, junk builds up in there. We need to take out the trash.
Yeah,
How do we
yeah.
do that? That's mainly done during our sleep. So that's a
Yeah.
huge thing.
And I think you kind of tapped on a really important element of that conversation. I'm going to offer an example so that people at home can kind of understand what we're talking about. I think there's two factors here, right? There's the added junk, the things that are creating inflammation and preventing that cleaning, right? And then the natural kind of decay of our body cells, right, naturally over time. Okay. So I would imagine most people, and if you are the angelic that have not, I mean, I'm amazed by you. You can let us know in the chat. Most people have experienced maybe a night where they drank a bit too much alcohol, right? They wake up the next day and they're not feeling good, right? And if you take away some of the pain, right? Take away the body pain, take away some of the headache. Think about the fact that it's really, really difficult to kind of form thoughts that next day. So people kind of fall into one of two camps when they have a hangover. They're either really struggling to think through things, or separate to that, they might be depressed and anxious, right? Or maybe combination, but people tend to do that. And one of the reasons behind that, I'm not going to get into the weird biochemistry, one of the big reasons behind that is A, you didn't sleep well, you didn't clean out your brain. But separate to that, you'll also put in a lot of junk to your brain. Okay. And so you're kind of, this brain is now stewing in all this junk and it's trying to do its function, right? You think about yourself, if you're trying to do something, but there's a lot of obstacles in your way, you can't. And we're very resilient. People are designed to be resilient. We can clean that up. We can recover from that singular night, assuming it's not an every night thing, right? But if you're living in chronic inflammation, if you're living in a way that your body can't repair itself, you're effectively sitting in that junk for a lot longer, and that will degrade. Not only are you having to live in that junk, it degrades and erodes the cells that are supposed to be helping keep that space clean. Okay. So it's a very tangible example. Every once in a while we all have a sip too much. But think about that in the terms of aging. We want to keep the brain clean, not only so we're getting rid of the junk, but separately so that the brain can keep itself clean. It's that self-fulfilling cycle. Yeah, but a really important one. All right. Why don't we move on a little bit to other considerations, because it's not all brain-based. We have some stuff that's going on in the gut as well. Yeah. Did you want to speak to that?
Well, there is more and more science and research that has been coming out in just the last 10 years
Weird.
about the gut-brain axis. Our gut bacteria, the diversity, the population, what's
Mhm.
going on directly affects our immune system, directly affects the hormones, these triggering molecules that go up to our brain and do a whole cascade of things and tell the brain, hey, we need more of this particular hormone, or we need, to do this. These are directly being affected. And how is our gut biome supposed to be fed? Okay, we want to feed the good guys, not the bad guys. So that goes right to the food we put in our mouths.
Mhm.
When we look at inflammation, depending on the particular microbes that you have there, they can produce more inflammatory factors.
Yeah.
So again, we want to make sure that's lowered. Excuse me, we actually have And I love our testing of our gut 360 because it gives us a beautiful picture
Mhm.
of how is your gut right now.
Yeah.
That nice picture, that data that we can actually look at and be able to target a little bit better. But I'll tell you, it really is important. The health of our gut, our immune system, our brains, the way it's functioning, and we want to be able to support that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think one thing that people need to think too, I mean, we're talking about memory, we're talking about how the brain functions. We know there's a lot of neurotransmitters involved in that. So for example, serotonin, it's one of those guys that really helps you focus and create some strategic thought, right? One of its many jobs. 90% of your serotonin is made in your gut, right? And so not having a good gut environment, which is both based on the bacteria there as well as from a stress perspective, right? That shifts it and then quite literally shifts the access that your brain has to the neurotransmitters that enable us to be thinking properly, right? So,
And when we think about serotonin, well, that also leads into melatonin,
mhm.
sleep. So it's like a domino effect.
I see what you did there. I like this transition. Why don't we transition into sleep? Because this is important. I love that though. Good job.
So, okay, so for sleep, poor sleep quality and disrupted circadian rhythms are increasingly linked to cognitive decline and that risk of dementia. And research really has indicated that improving someone's sleep hygiene, addressing any sleep disorders, say if you have sleep apnea or, anything like that, you know, when you address these issues, you can then optimize that circadian alignment. And
Mhm.
you can do things. And actually, you spoke about this last night in the webinar on BDNF, because this can be helped as far as circadian alignment with light exposure, lifestyle adjustments, you know, all kinds of things that we can actually get into a few of these particular preventative and proactive measures as we go on with this webinar.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. No, I think sleep tends to be, I would imagine if you're someone who comes to these webinars a lot, right? Um, you've heard us talk ad nauseum about sleep, but there's a reason for that, right? Sleep is what founds our health for better and worse because it founds how we clean up, right? It founds how we consolidate and create our memories, right? I tell this a lot to students, the younger folk that come in that think they don't never need to sleep, right? Part of studying is quite literally sleeping so that you can consolidate and put those memories together. As you get older, if you're not sleeping, you're depriving yourself of that capacity to create and embed memories and other content within your brains. So if you have several, I just said brains, it's cool. There's one in your gut. That's fine. There's two. Yeah, no, but I think sleep is such a foundational one. We spoke about it yesterday. We have a litany of webinars on it. So we'll let the powers that be put some of those webinars into the chat as well. Um, have we, oh, you know what we have missed in this list, and I think it's probably one of the most studied and important. Um, Cognitive engagement, both in the sense of mental exercise and separately in the social sense, right? Yeah, yeah. I know this is a favorite one of yours. Yeah.
oh, absolutely. I mean, and this actually gets back to BDNF. What fires together, wires together, using your brain. You know, it's really interesting because one of the more recent things that we tend to lose with technology, maps, like doing Google Maps or iMaps, to get directions. We're
Yeah.
just following what they're telling us. Where, shoot, I remember way back, we didn't have those. We had maps. And when you were driving or getting somewhere, you had to look at the road signs.
Yeah.
You had to become familiar with locations or looking at places, remembering specific buildings or this memory.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely amazing how much we got complacent leaning into, and I'm at fault for this too, letting Siri tell me where to go, where if I didn't have it, then I'd really have to start paying attention again. We really need to start engaging our brains more. And I love Jim Quick. He has Quick Brain, and he has these real neat bite-sized ways of working the brain, of
Mm.
engaging and using your brain. Take a different route home. Don't always take the same route. Um, you know, Also, oh, you're going to love this. Dancing. Dancing really engages the brain, especially in steps, and that the spatial awareness, and moving to
Mhm.
you are using so many different parts of the brain. So it's really that active engagement.
How many people, I'm just curious from our audience, since Dr. Varden and I, since Laura and I have been dancing, how many of you have been dancing over the past few days? I'm curious if you've increased that. We'll take full credit, but I'm just curious if you have. Yeah. Yeah, no, I like that because I think in part, and I think what you're tapping on when we talk about, be it brain exercises through some of those apps, be it through figuring out quite literally via maps how you're going to do something, that planning, right? Or, and we haven't really gone too deeply into this. Oh, Judy does folk dancing. I used to do that. Oh, Mary's a ballet dancer.
Tap and jazz as well.
Girl,
Nice.
conversations. But I think one thing that we haven't touched on, I think this is kind of the theme through cognitive activities. So, right, those brain activities via apps, um, dancing, right? That very coordinated, navigating on a map or not, I get lost. Or last, possibly engaging socially with people, right? All of these activities require you to think in the moment, to plan in the moment, to respond. It requires novel activity. And if I jump back to the patient that I have who's in his mid 80s, one of the power of his social networks is A, there's a lot of people in there, so it's never the same conversation. B, it's many different ages. So to Lara's point, an 80-year-old is talking to a 20-year-old, and the 20-year-old's trying to explain TikTok to him. Like, I don't know. I'm Instagram years old. I do not understand TikTok, but I try and talk to some young folk who are going to teach me TikTok. And one day I can pretend to be TikTok years old, right? But there's this element when you cross generations, when you have a wide varied, you're exposed to new and different. And I think, right, part of when we talk about how do we keep our memory fresh, how do we keep our brain fresh, new and different is probably amongst the best elixirs out there, right? Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, I gotta say, I think we have a winner.
Oh, do we? Oh, mom.
We do. We
Cool.
do. Oh my gosh, Sue Nortimo. Okay, so
All right, that's fine. Let's hear it.
now this is where Dr. Kosterman's gonna get all antsy about the weird looking man that's hiding in the bookshelf on the second shelf down behind her. So the production team in the back end have been watching this guy that looks like he's out of Scream or something hanging out back there, and we were all trying to figure out what it was. So Sue, you get a prize for guessing what's in Dr. Kosterman's bookshelf, and everybody else that's here and that's participating and putting questions in. I'm going to send something to every single person on this call tonight. So you guys will get emails over the next couple of days from someone in our fulfillment team asking for your mailing address. Don't worry, it's just a gift from me. Thank you, doctors, as you were.
Well, just before we jump out, I really would like to acknowledge Trudy, because Trudy's one of my champions insofar as Trudy loves my cats. And so Trudy, as you know, I don't control them, they control me. So they come occasionally and bless us, and sometimes they don't. Right now, they're not in a blessing mood, and I'm sorry. I wish I could control the gods, but here we are.
You
But
know,
thank you
we
for
should
acknowledging.
get Trudy a picture of the cats and just have them sign it.
Big old paw.
That implies control that I do not have, but I'll try. All right, let's jump back into this. So, Dr. Varden, we've kind of listed out at least different areas, different ways that you can impact. So why don't we explore some of the genes behind it? And as we explore some of the genes, why don't we also offer some of our thoughts, tips, and tricks around it?
Absolutely.
Yes.
And everyone, I want you to realize that the question that we put in about what do you see as different and having you look around, that wasn't like just a for fun type of thing. I mean, it is fun, but the where's Waldo and being able to decipher and do that, what are you using? Your brain. You are, visualizing and trying to see what is different, what is the same, what's off, what's challenging. You were using your brain in a different way than you have been doing, possibly. So these are all ways, any kinds of puzzles and, you know, um, interesting different things. This is how you use your brain and you keep it sharp. So awesome job. Good for you guys. I'm so happy to see that interaction.
Yeah.
Jumping.
And also playing. I don't think we're foolish enough. It's important to be foolish and playful. And searching for a naked man on my shelf clearly is foolish.
You got to throw the fun in there.
Yeah.
You need to enjoy life, and that joy and the fun helps
Hmm.
keep you feeling young, help keeps your brain energized and joyful, and
Mm.
releases, good hormones that produce that, which is something else we are going to be touching on, is the hormonal influence in
Mhm.
brain health. So let's put a pin in that and get to the genes. So
Mhm.
again, one that we have been talking about that I'm not going to be diving into a lot, but it is always important to mention, the BDNF. So that is for your neuroplasticity, that growth of those neurons, what fires together, wires together.
Yeah.
Another one, COMT. COMT is important. This
Mhm.
is the catechol O methyltransferase gene. This gene actually plays a role in the breakdown of dopamine. That's a neurotransmitter, very crucial for working memory, that cognitive flexibility. And depending on the speed of clearance, that COMT gene actually influences the enzyme's activity. For people who may carry an allele, an A, okay, that makes it a little bit slower. Uh, it can, it can be slower with the dopamine breakdown, and that can actually result in improved memory performance and cognitive resilience under stress.
Mhm.
So, don't think that, oh, it's not so much like a good profile, bad profile, or this. Each
Mm.
one, there are strengths and weaknesses and different aspects, because each has several different functions. But that one in particular, with brain health memory, that's how it works through with the function.
Yeah.
Um, there are others, which would you want to throw in one or two?
Well, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't address kind of the elephant in the room, or and that being FOXO3, right?
Mhm.
So a lot of people, I think when we first started exploring genetics, right, Americans and North Americans, I mean the fullness of the continent, um, we tend to be very much like, give me a pill, give me one thing to do that'll fix me forever. And I think that mentality crossed over when we were looking at the genome and we're really saying, find that singular gene, find this, fountain of youth that's going to tell me if I live forever. And at the time, this was what, 10, 15 years ago? You can hold me honest. I don't do time very well. 10, 15 years ago, that guy was FOXO3. And everyone thought if you had a specific presentation of FOXO3, you were going to live forever. And if you didn't, you were screwed and good luck and enjoy your popcorn. Right. Um, and so Categorically not true. Not true. FOXO3, while it is beneficial, and I don't want to demote its importance, okay, having FOXO3 doesn't mean you will live forever. What it does do, though, is FOXO3 is really, really important in antioxidant wellness. Namely, it's something that will scavenge free radicals and mute them out. So when we talk about, that inflammatory, that toxin burden, and how do we keep our body clean, FOXO3 is one of the bigger, stronger actors in that. And that's why people with this presentation can live longer and better and more resilient because they're able to fend off some of that oxidant health, right? But it's really important to remember there are people kicking around very well without this gene. Aging, just like everything else, and memory, just like everything else, is multifactorial. And if you don't have one thing, that's cool. Focus on what you do have and support what you don't have, right? So I think FOXO3 is at least the gene that I wanted to talk about, because again, a lot of people come to me and being like, do I have it? And I'm like, it's important if you do or don't, but also there's other things to think about. Yeah. What else are you thinking about when you're thinking about memory and aging in particular?
For memory and aging, okay, so the methylation pathway,
Yeah.
very important. Which includes your MTHFR, that motherfucker gene.
Everyone's favorite.
And well, this gene, it regulates folate metabolism, very crucial for DNA repair, methylation processes in the brain. Okay. It can also affect homocysteine levels. Now, when homocysteine levels are elevated, that can be neurotoxic. That can contribute to cognitive decline and neurodegeneration. So, supporting your methylation pathway through things like diet, supplementation, that can be very essential for brain health, particularly in individuals with MTHFR polymorphisms or other, issues in their methylation pathway. I am
Mhm.
one of them. So this is something I'm stay on top of. Um, Another one which is oftentimes associated with Alzheimer's, ApoE.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, when we're looking at the ApoE gene, this is one of the most researched genes regarding its influence on brain health and memory.
Mhm.
And getting a little nerdy here, this is actually a component of lipoprotein particles. So your HDLs, your LDLs, your VLDLs, and I'm sure many of you will recognize these because they're what's on your blood work, your, lipid profile. Okay. And it's very important because this gene makes a protein that is a transporter. Okay. And it's very crucial in the development and maintenance and repair of the central nervous system and regulates a lot of different signaling pathways. This is a very primary function in the brain is to transport that cholesterol. So, how good are you? Just throwing this out there because people are like, oh, wait, my ApoE, let me go to my reports and see what it is. So there's actually three versions. There's an ApoE2, E3, and E4. If
Mhm.
you have an ApoE4 version in there, that is considered an increased risk factor to Alzheimer's disease, where E2 is actually considered protective. Um, and their wonderful review article that was published in Frontiers of Neuroscience back in 2021 that actually goes into detail about ApoE, Alzheimer's disease, and the connections. Really interesting paper.
Yeah. And so should you be someone in our audience who has that 4 variant, um, it's not fatalistic. There are people who are older with that variant and they're kicking along well. That said, we also see a lot of correlation there between incredible control and supportive diet, right? Especially when it comes to your sugars, right? Type 3 diabetes, dementia, right? So those people with that variant, exquisite, incredible control around diet, lower sugar, very mindful of certain saturated fats, right? Dale Bredesen, spectacular protocol. There's a lot of practitioners at DNA Co. elsewhere that focus and support that. Okay. Um, Also think about the stress element, right? Stress is correlated to worse outcomes when it comes to Alzheimer's dementia. Okay. And so something to be mindful of if you have that variant, having a really strong, robust plan when it comes to stress management, very, very important, right? And for people in general, but especially for the females out there, right? Ensuring there's adequate, proper estrogen management throughout the course of your life, right? In particular, when females hit that menopause space and then transition into postmenopause, that loss of estrogen has impacts beyond bones, but also has a lot of impacts on insulin and cognitive well-being. There's some interesting studies that look at BHRT or supplemental bioidentical hormones and how that can kind of um, curtail and support and mitigate some of the risks there. Again, none of this is to say you must do all of this. It is just to say there's a lot of options. There's a lot of personalized options that you can bring in should you have that variant, should you not have FOXO3, should you have really crappy BDNF, whatever it is, right? It's to say there's not going to be one plan, but a lot of specialized plans for different people. Yeah. And I wonder, at some point in time, we do need to transition to questions and answers. But before we do that, Laura, any other thoughts or genes that you wanted to cover? I know we've touched on a few, and again, I can appreciate people are like, you just listed them all, and
Sure.
and that's really that element of personalization that I mentioned, right? My patient who's mid-80s living his best life, his genes are not exceptional or different, relatively speaking. This said, I do know his genes and we very focusedly support the weak spaces, right? So something just to consider. Yeah.
I think we touched on like the major ones,
Okay.
because everything from there, I think, is more supportive and more personalized. And it just goes to show how important knowing your genes are,
Mhm.
that we can work more specifically getting into nutrition. Because
Mhm.
nutritional interventions and supplements, which I know that we're going to tap in on, and I know some of the questions are asking about that.
Mm,
For
mm.
example, and I will start, spitting out some here. Nutrients like omega-3 fatty acids, your vitamin D, antioxidants. These are frequently studied in their role for
Mhm.
supporting cognitive health. Your antioxidants, the polyphenols, okay, things found in berries, green tea. Again, these show a lot of promise in the protection for the brain,
Mhm.
due to oxidative stress, inflammaging, okay?
Yeah.
Some supplements, NAD precursors, okay? Other anti-aging compounds, a lot of these biohacking, type tools and neuroprotective uh, supplements have been found to be wonderful. So yeah, I think I want to dive into the questions because there's some great
Let's
ones.
do it. Before we do that, I just one other quick thought just around I can imagine some people asking the question of, so you just said eat well, how do I eat? Um, And the one thought I would offer is going to be, you know, how I said when it comes to friend groups, especially as you get older, you want variety. You want many different ages, you want many different people, right? One of the tricky habits I think that people get into when they get older is they kind of do the same thing. Monday is meatloaf, Tuesday is chicken fingers, Wednesday is something else. I'm not creative enough to think of a Wednesday. It is Thursday evening family. We're getting there. But people get very regimented. And there's an element of, again, people are like, oh, well, I made this when I was 40 and I can make it when I'm 60. I'm not going to change it. Toss up your diet. The more variety you have in your diet, not only are you going to be getting, as Dr. Varden mentioned here, different um, nutrients and elements that come from our food, you're also forcing yourself to think of different ways. One of my favorite exercises to assign parents with their children is go to the grocery store, have your kid once a week pick out the funniest or weirdest vegetable that they have. And then your job is to figure out how to make that, right? Not only are you going to be introducing a new, yeah, not only are you introducing here a new and different food to your diet, you're also forcing the brain here to get creative, right? When was the last time anyone here cooked with cactus It is spectacularly delicious. Yesterday we talked about lion's mane. It is exceptionally delicious. Both of those things, girlfriend did not know how to cook. Girlfriend had to learn how to cook them. But that's unto itself fun. And then you make mistakes and you're like, cool, I'm going to play with my burnt food now. But think about this. Think about these opportunities that two birds, one proverbial stone, right? Yeah. All right, Dr. Varden, let's jump into questions and answers, and you get to why don't you curate us through? Do you want to start with the first one?
Okay, so we have Jennifer saying she's 48, wondering if she's suffering from perimenopausal brain fog or if it's more serious. Her
Mm.
father passed away from Alzheimer's at 73. I'm sorry. So it's always in the back of her mind. Yeah, you're not alone with that. She has an ApoE3/4 gene and believes she's taking the right steps to prevent with diet and exercise, but is there a way to know for sure if it's cognitive decline?
Mhm. Shall I or shall you?
Actually, go ahead, and then I've got some other things depending on if uh,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So Jennifer, my first thought would be, first and foremost, find a primary care provider that you really resonate with and is willing to go on this journey with you. And by journey, what do I mean? First of all, I think you do need to have that hormonal assessment, right? As females enter perimenopause, a lot of stuff changes within the brains. We just talked about that change in estrogen, how it influences not only insulin, but it will influence there's a lot of estrogen receptors in the brain, and so it shifts how you're able to do that, not even considering, as some of the more inflammatory estrogens that we're more prone to make during that period. So I think it's really important to assess for that first, right? Let's assess for the obvious before we jump to the fear of it. That said, I also think there's a lot of cognitive testing that can be done. There's different screening exams, and a thing that I love with people is when you start to get baselines when you're young. 48 is still very young, right? And so we want to establish some baselines. There's different tests. We can start keeping those on record, right? And so that we know how performance is changing over time. Okay. And so I really encourage you to find a practitioner that you resonate strongly with and start creating this plan, because this person will be through the journey. Whatever the journey might come out to be, you want to have that primary person who knows your history and will be that caretaker and guardian of information as you go through. So I really hope, I know, I appreciate that was a little bit of a general advice, right? But I think your primary care provider in this instance, and then working up that hormone profile, and then establishing that history is so exceptionally important. um Dr. Varden, what are you going to add? Because you're brilliant and I know you got something that I missed.
well, actually, that's I would reiterate
Mm.
and concur with exactly what you said because honestly, just stating about possible hormones, which we don't have any information on, or could this be going into Alzheimer's? We don't have enough information. We personally do not have enough of your history, and that really needs to be assessed with someone who has access to all that, who can talk to you, who can administer these particular types of tests, because there are specific cognitive tests that are given by professionals. So but there's so many other things to look at. So um, taking the step, asking, and then finding someone that you really trust, a healthcare professional, is definitely the way to go. There's a question that I had to uh, comment on this simply because I do have a bit of a soft heart for the person asking the question.
Yeah.
That Alyssa asked, do arts and crafts and various creations count as working the brain? Does it have to be,
This creative,
calculated?
I love this. Yeah,
And
you're the
and I
perfect
think
person for
it's
this.
really important, because yes, absolutely, arts and crafts and other creative activities can count as working the brain. This engages, the activities, the stimulating activities in various cognitive processes and problem solving, spatial awareness, fine motor skills. I think that's fantastic. And for those of you who want some science behind it, there was a study in the Journal of Psychiatry and Clinical Neurosciences that found that older adults who engage in artistic activities had a reduced risk of cognitive impairment.
Mhm.
So I wanted to throw in, things that you can do, that it doesn't have to be crossword puzzles or doing, advanced, differential mathematical equations.
Okay.
So enjoy, have fun.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's an important part, right? A big part of the advice I give people when they say, how can I live forever and healthy? Right? There's an element of finding what you enjoy. I can give you the perfect diet based on your genes and a few other things, but if you hate the foods in that perfect diet, it's not going to work and you're going to go back to your old diet, right? There's a huge element. If you love it, you will naturally maintain that habit. So falling in love with the way, enjoying the way you do things is super important.
Well, I see that Mary Nash, she's a regular for us, and we are so happy that you are here, Mary. She's saying that she's got an ApoE44 and her 9p21, it says C. So I'm not quite sure because usually it's a
4G. She's a 4G. Yeah.
Oh, okay. And with too high cholesterol, advanced lipid panel, ApoB, and nothing brings it down except pharmaceuticals. What is she supposed to do? I I am not a medical doctor. I do not diagnose or prescribe. This is actually something that, again, I would say working with someone to help tease that out. But again, not as much information, but Dr.
Yeah.
Krista,
Yeah.
want
Yeah.
to.
Yeah, so Mary, I'll give you some thoughts. I'm not directing care at all because I think really you do need to see blood work in order to direct different options. So when it comes to people with your profile here, right, there is sincere concern around that impact that excessive cholesterol can do. And I think there is, to a degree, some conventional wisdom in taking some statins or other things that were lower. That said, I think as you do that, there's very specific tests that you can run, very specific blood work that you can run that it will check for different metabolites and really check in on how the brain health is going. And so one of the concerns when it comes to statins is that it is going to dysregulate cholesterol in a way that will impact the brain and cognitive function. Okay. And so when you're trying to balance two really big competing things, right? This cardiovascular wellness that if we don't have heart happy, we can't have brain happy, coupled with we want brain happy or else why, right? I think at this point in time, it would be good to engage with a clinician, understand the suggested agents, and then understand the plan for monitoring. How is it impacting your brain? Okay, there are blood panels that will do that. And so it's at this point in time, again, finding a clinician, exploring your options based on your history. Again, me just knowing those two parameters, your 9p21 and your ApoE, unfortunately is not enough. But find a clinician who's very well read in that, and they can walk you through and support that. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. That would be my thought. And I hope that's helpful.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Raymond has got lots of wonderful questions. So let's kind of go through here. So the first one is, how does nutrition affect brain function and cognitive health? And here I want to say that nutrition, first of all, it's providing information. It's providing cofactors for so many different processes in the body, plays a very crucial role in brain function and cognitive health by influencing the structure and function of the brain, as well as processes like
Mhm.
neurotransmission, neuroplasticity. And I'll give just a couple examples. Omega-3 fatty acids, okay, particularly DHA. So very critical, maintaining that structural integrity of cell membranes of the brain. It's also a primary component of brain tissue, which is obviously essential for cognitive function, memory, learning, things like that. Antioxidants. So we're talking vitamin C, E, polyphenols, flavonoids. These are found in fruits, vegetables, and teas. Okay. They help to reduce oxidative stress and inflammation. Remember the inflammaging. So we really want to make sure that the oxidative stress is lowered because that damages brain cells and can contribute to neurodegenerative diseases. I mean, there are several other things. I mean, like B vitamins in particular, because it helps support methylation, making sure that you have glucose regulation, lots of different things. Choline,
Mhm.
another one found in eggs and liver, very important for the production of acetylcholine, that neurotransmitter involved
Mhm.
in memory and learning. So
Mhm. I love that. I love Raymond jumped into the comments, and Dr. Varden, this is just an accolade to you doing a spectacular job this evening. He's already said, you've answered all my questions. This said, Raymond, I'm going to challenge you. Child, you should remember what you submitted. Um, number 5 of your questions, I don't think we've directly addressed it, so I'm going to tease that one out, and then we'll lay your list to rest, and we'll move on to something else. Very specifically, he does ask, does physical exercise contribute to brain health? Um, and Lara, the answer is yes, but would you like to elaborate on why the answer is yes?
okay, so let's talk about neurogenesis, the growth of new brain cells. So exercise, particularly, and you talked about this earlier in the webinar, aerobic activities. Okay, running, walking, swimming, all of these types of, aerobic activities, they help to promote the new neurons, especially in the hippocampus. Now, hippocampus, this is that region that's very critical for memory and learning. There are studies that have indicated that regular physical activity increases levels of BDNF, that protein supporting that survival and growth of the neurons.
Mhm.
It also physical activity for cognitive function, and I had mentioned this before about that working memory, the movements, but it includes attention, processing speed, executive function, your working memory, and this includes both aerobic and resistance training, which you actually mentioned on last night's webinar. These have been shown to contribute to that cognitive improvement. And actually, a great research article in the Journal of Frontiers in Aging Neuroscience actually reported that exercise boosts cognitive function by improving blood flow to the brain and enhancing neuroplasticity. So, of course, we can also talk about the reduction of inflammation and stress,
Mhm.
and how important that is, that physical activity helping to reduce those stress hormones like cortisol,
Yeah.
boosting endorphins, for better mood. So, I mean, the list goes on, but that's definitely the highlights.
Yeah. I think the adage that you hear over time in regards to kind of the move it or lose it, and I'd apply like move your brain or lose it, move your body or lose it, right? Some accommodations might need to be made as you get older. We're not asking, our 80-year-olds to get up on a balance beam and do a few flips like Miss Biles. But we are asking you within what is reasonable for your body and what feels good to your body to keep moving it, right? And and again, if you jump on, again, I'm Instagram years old. If you jump on Instagram or other social media feeds, you'll always see those stories of, here's this person who is 70, 80, and they've just learned to do this. Your body is designed to learn and heal. And if you give it those sorts of things, you know, at 70, maybe you can learn gymnastics. Like, why not? It'll probably take you a bit longer, but why not? That's kind of a fun goal. You can get like a fun little bodysuit. Be great. All right, let's jump into some other questions before I assign people homework of learning gymnastics. Um, okay, so Cameron is saying they have an 89-year-old dad and is just starting to decline mentally, memory-wise, not dementia yet, question mark. Before I go further in the question, take them to a doctor and have that evaluated, period. Right. I think it's a valid question. I think especially when you're close to it, you're not necessarily the appropriate person to assess it. Take them to a doctor. There's a lot of really happy exams that can be done. Okay. I'm not sure how I can best support him, supplements, devices, etc. He has sleep apnea and a CPAP machine. He also is starting to look a little bit frail. Um, and then walks daily recommendations. Okay. Um, so some thoughts there, I think, and this is a bit difficult to offer because I'd be very curious as to living conditions of dad. Are they still independently living? What are the social interactions? What does the diet look like? Right. First and foremost, as basic as this sounds, I'd really, and there's a lot of social support workers, physical support workers. There's a lot of aides that you can reach out to and say, for someone who is 90, let's assess their daily tasks. Let's assess their diet. Let's assess these sorts of things. Um, because you want to set up a living environment, a home environment where they are constantly being in healthy ways challenged, with good foods, challenged with a very interactive schedule, challenged to be continually cleaned, bathed, etc. Right? Um, as well as challenged from a mental health perspective. One of the things that you'll see often with Jerry's, right, with that age group is secondary to loneliness, secondary to isolation, secondary to simply when you reach that age, it's not uncommon news to hear someone you know has passed away, right? There's incredible prevalence of depression, anxiety, and maybe not articulated, right? In particular, for some of those generations, you're not allowed to talk about that, or they may not have language to talk about that, right? Either it wasn't socially acceptable or something that younger generations are gifting me and those that are older is a lot of language around emotions, a lot of language around this is how I feel and that's okay. Right. So I would say first and foremost, Cameron, kind of doing those assessments, take your dad to a doctor, get that mental assessment done, because maybe there might be some agents and supports, maybe they're low in omegas. That's a quick, beautiful, easy fix that you'll see return on wonderfully. Okay. And then the other thing I would offer, Cameron, is going to be for you specifically. Caring for someone as they get older is both a privilege and a tax. Privilege in the sense that you get to engage so tenderly with someone who I would imagine you care for, given this question, right? And separate to that, um, a tax in the sense of it's going to take time, energy, and effort, right? Dr. Varden watched her mom, I would imagine, be taxed in a way. I watched my mother be taxed in a way as she cared for her mom, right? So make sure you're taking care of yourself, because the statistics around caregivers kind of wearing themselves out, we don't want that for you because plainly again, it's that airplane advice. If the plane is starting to shake and you need to put on that mask, it's important that you can do that so you have the cognitive ability, the wherewithal in order to put your father's on. Okay. I know that's really hard advice to follow, but it's something just to keep mindful of. So be that support groups, be that engaging with other family members, be that, one day a week you hire a caregiver so that you can go out and be crazy and foolish and fun. All of the above, very, very, very important. Okay. And then also, since the CPAP is there, make sure that's maintained properly. There's nothing kind of crawling in the pipes. A lot of people will get kind of like a soft pneumonia, like a low-grade pneumonia or something like that, because that thing be dirty. So also maintaining that and all the other fun things. Yeah. Okay.
Actually, I'm going to mention about as a caregiver taking care of yourself. The group that worked with my parents as they took care of my grandmother, they made my parents take a week off once a month to not have my grandmother there, just so they could kind of decompress, find themselves, take care of themselves, and then, take her back in. It's difficult, for routines and everything else, especially when they are in that mental state. But we don't want you declining either. So
Yeah.
important.
Marissa in the chat is offering to Cameron, I would imagine other people as well, that she herself does this and she still works. So kind of balancing, juggling all the proverbial balls. And so again, I'd really consider, be it her, be it others, finding that community of support, because sometimes one of the best medicines is simply hearing someone else be like, Girl, me too. I struggle the same way. Cameron, I don't know your gender. That was just me expressing, but um, just something to think of, right? Find other like minds that can journey through that with you because as much as we want Papa to live forever, Papa won't. And we want to make sure you're supported through that beautiful journey that is end of life. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Um, all right, Dr. Varden, I have a question for you from Diana. How do you know if you have inflammation?
That is a very big question. It's an excellent question. I am
Mhm.
going to focus this uh, in neuroinflammation because we're talking about the brain. So let's kind of narrow it down some. Uh, this would be things like difficulty concentrating, memory issues, that general feeling of brain fog. Can indicate inflammation in the brain. It can often be subtle at first, but progress over time. Things like mood disorders. Okay, neuroinflammation is often linked to conditions like depression and anxiety and things like that. Fatigue, persistent mental and physical fatigue, even if you get adequate rest. That can be a common symptom. Sleep problems, if you have any kind of disrupted sleep patterns, insomnia, you're not feeling rested after sleep, that could be something. And it can also uh, be exacerbated, um, you know, because poor sleep can exacerbate inflammation. Inflammation exacerbates poor sleep. It's like it's this vicious cycle. Um, Headaches, frequent headaches is another one. Sensory issues, being overly sensitive to lights or sound, even smells, that can actually be something. But if you take a look at some actual data, um, biomarkers, diagnostic tests, you want to look at things like C-reactive protein, CRP. Because that's often associated with systemic inflammation. Also, cytokines. These are pro inflammatory molecules. So, this is like your interleukin 6, IL-6, or the tumor necrosis factor alpha, TNF alpha. These are often found in people with neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's when those are elevated. Okay, they're also brain imaging. If you have like an MRI, PET scan, or a functional MRI, these are all tests, diagnostics that you can have done. And I'll tell you, uh, just to throw this out there, Dr. Daniel Amen and the Amen Clinic, wonderful in brain health. Dr. Dale Brednison, which you have already mentioned, Dr. Krista. So, get some information because they also have protocols in general that you can follow for increasing your brain health.
Yeah, yeah, I like all that. I think inflammation's a very, very tricky one insofar as Dr. Lars mentioned, there's a whole list and it tends to show up very specific in people. And there's some tests, there's some general tests, general blood work. You can also look more advanced testing, at least when it comes to genomics, is you can look at different methylation patterns, how they show up on your genes. We talked about this Tuesday. Different methylation patterns atop your genes, that epigenetic change can be really reflective of some chronic inflammation too. Okay. All right. I'd like to know how NAD, I guess, treats or addresses neural inflammation. Lara, do you want to go into that one and some of the mechanisms there?
Sure. Well, NAD plus, this stands for nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide. It's a mouthful. And precursors of that. They actually play a very significant role in treating neuroinflammation by promoting cellular repair. They also reduce oxidative stress, which we've mentioned before. And they also help to improve mitochondrial function. Got to have mitochondria working because they are what's giving the energy to those cells, to those brain cells, and letting them function the way they're supposed to. So for NAD plus, NAD plus is very important for cellular metabolism, that energy production that I had mentioned. They also help to activate sirtuins. Sirtuins are a group of enzymes that are involved in the DNA repair. There we go. And also help to regulate that inflammation, protection against oxidative stress. Um, oh, there is David. Oh, darn, I forgot his name. He's a researcher, originally at Harvard, I believe. David Sinclair. There we go.
Mm.
David Sinclair has done a lot of research into sirtuins, into NAD plus, and these precursors. So
Mhm.
really great information. I remember following him from
Yeah.
years ago. So yeah.
One thing I would offer, because I think it's really, I think the conversation, the research around NAD is really important, and I'm glad you captured that there because it's very important. One thing I would also offer to people listening is um, supplements sometimes can be very, very trendy, right? And so there's always companies that are pushing this or that because, in part, because there's new research around it. And I don't want to take from that. It's really important. But also, in part, they're trying to make a profit. So remember, when you're trying to address mitochondrial health, it's not just NAD. Right? You have to think about some of the minerals that go in concert with that. You have to think of some of the other cofactors, right? And that's not to say you need to take all the supplements in the world. It's to say sincerely work with a professional when you're creating your supplement routine. Okay. Because you want to ensure that what you're taking is appropriate and it's being supported, right? You don't want to take, just someone dropped in on the chat that Sinclair recommends and I'm not even going to try and pronounce that. It's a lovely little B vitamin derivative, but you want to take that in concert with a few other things to support and make sure effectively you're not just wasting your money. Okay. So just something to consider as you think about bringing in supplements to your diet. They are like medication, okay, or they can be, right? They're not necessarily marketed and prescribed and protected as such, but it's still really important to be doing it intelligently. Yep. All right. So let's continue on with our questions. Jennifer, uh, okay. I have read the cleaning and repair of the brain does largely take place between 10 and 2. Do you feel this is valid? Oh, you asking the chronotype questions. Okay.
Well, actually, there's a little bit more to that, and that is the structure of how sleep is delineated throughout the night. And
Mhm.
the reason why that has been stated, theorized, and is that it is during the earlier part of the night that you have the most deep sleep, because sleep actually is, by average, is chunked out in 90-minute sections. Through these 90-minute sections, you have your light sleep, deep sleep, REM, back to light sleep. So this repeats, but earlier in the evening, you have more deep sleep, less REM, and then it starts to shift as it goes into the later part of the night into the morning, where you have less deep sleep, more REM. Well, deep sleep, what we talked about earlier, is when we get that flush, that cleaning, of the brain. So that is, why that time period has been notated, and the validity to it, it makes sense.
Mhm. Yeah, perfect. Love that explanation. The only thing I'd offer is second half of the night, a lot of memory consolidation. So be mindful for that. But then also separately, that very specific time, that's not a witching hour to a certain extent. Oftentimes, depending on where you live, that tends to be the darker, the time that you want to be that is normal to be sleeping. I know we have some night owls present. I know we have some morning birds. There's an element behind this of consistency, right? If you can't make it to bed at 10, but you can make it at midnight, for example, whatever arbitrary thing is, your more effective sleep to an extent is going to be that midnight to 4. What I'd suggest, be consistent and then practice all those sleep hygiene things because that will play into it. 10 to 2 is not a magic witching hour necessarily. Maybe it is. I don't know. We have a super moon tonight. We'll find out. All right.
Actually, I believe it's a hunter's moon.
Oh, is it a hunter moon? Oh,
Yeah.
okay. All right. I like you. I see you. Good job. All right. Um, Jill. So Jill's asking, Can you address having a BDNF and a TPH2 in an epistatic way? Um, how does that affect cognitive skills in the future? Does the epistasis? Yeah, okay. So Jill, I'm going to answer this very briefly, but then also refer you to the webinar we did last night. Okay, because I don't want to do a disservice to you by giving you a bad answer, but we also did a full webinar on this last night. So what Jill's referring to is, again, we see DNA, we hear of all these genes said out loud as if they're singular things and not this beautiful helical structure. In this helical structure, different genes are going to interact with one another. And so she's referring to when you have an optimal presentation of BDNF and then a separate gene, something that influences serotonin, if you also have that optimal presentation, they, based on location, will interact with one another. And what happens is the other gene will suppress the activity of BDNF. And so while you may, in that standalone gene sense, in that SNP sense, okay, have optimal presentation, because of this epistasis, epi meaning above, stasis meaning stop, because of this interaction, you no longer have, at least from a functional perspective, optimal BDNF. Okay. And so if that's the case, if you are someone with this epistatic interaction, I really encourage listening to the webinar yesterday so that you can go through and learn different ways that you can support your BDNF. Okay, because it is to memory, to learning, to all the fun things, to mood. It is delightfully important. Yeah. All right. Um, the next question here is from Renee, and I'm not sure how to address this question. She's offering that her ApoE result is 3-4. And so this does mean that you do have one of those more concerning ApoE4 alleles. And so the education, the tips and tricks that Dr. Varden offered just a little bit earlier, very, very much apply to you. I'd, reach out to your clinician, start evaluating for blood sugar, start kind of creating a plan as to, since I have this risk factor, what can I do? Right. And so I would say there's an important element there of now that you know, you're empowered to do a little bit differently. Okay. Dr. Lara, do you want to do the next one?
Sure. Jennifer says that her 77-year-old cousin has very serious memory loss. She goes to bed between 2 and 3 a.m. And
Mhm.
Jennifer has counseled her that the habit is probably contributing to her memory loss. Would we agree?
Mhm.
And she's missing the ideal brain cleaning time that was discussed earlier. I would say, in a general sense, from research, from observations, everything else, I would agree. When you have a consistent lack of quality sleep, timing, everything, it will affect the body, inflammation, neural inflammation, and therefore the memory. So
It's Jennifer, it's also pretty common, especially in some more advanced dementia cases, that you will see something, and there's a technical term that I don't remember, effectively where a person's circadian rhythm starts to flip. So during the day, they're sleeping, during the evening, they're up. This person could be experiencing that. I think there's an element of advanced concern here. So I don't know if you're part of the care team. I don't know if you have influence in this person's life, but really aligning them with a geriatrician or someone that works in this space, I think is really, really important. Um, just as I think we're seeing a beautiful effort within female and women's health as to understanding what's going on and how do we better support, we're starting to see similar efforts within the geriatric space. We're no longer believing that, once you hit an age, you're just destined to die. There's more effort and energy to offer quality life. And so I'm not saying this can be reversed. There'd be a full medical workup to understand what's going on. But I'd really, really, really encourage this person engage with a well-read and an optimistic gerontologist, because there's a lot that can be done and should be done. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Marissa, she is asking, ooh, mon Dieu, I like this question. Do herbal supplements work just as well as bioidentical in perimenopause? Please and thank you. Um, so I'm going to offer a few different answers, right? This there's an element here of personal choice in the sense of if you prefer herbs or if you prefer other, right? That's probably the best solution for you. We have a few practitioners that work with traditional Chinese herbs, which are spectacular when it comes to perimenopause management. That needs to be done in concert with diet. And so I would say, are there instances where menopause, perimenopause can be managed with herbs? Absolutely. There tends to be a little bit more upfront work there insofar as your diet, your this herbal supplementation, and a few other factors, including genes, are going to be really important. You don't kind of get that consistent big gun, if you will, of the big gun of here are the supplemental hormones. So there's an element of personal choice. And I'd really recommend engaging with a clinician because I think they can in certain instances. And there's a lot of factors to consider there. Yeah. Dr. Varden, any other thoughts there for Marissa?
Um, I would say that realizing that, whether it is bioidentical hormone replacement or herbals, they do work differently, slightly differently. So, it really is a matter of what's going on with you. What are your goals? For any type of hormone adjustment through the use of
Mm.
herbals or, through bioidentical hormones, and then working with someone because, obviously there are pros and cons to each, and also how are you responding to those things. So really working with someone who can follow your progress and adjust as necessary. So
Mhm. Yeah, love it. All right, Kathleen is asking the question in regards to cognitive health, are there differences in choreographed dances compared to oh my gosh. Lara, can you word that for me?
yes, improvisational
That
dance.
one, that one, that word. So effectively, can you freestyle or do you have to be more choreographed? I'll be honest, I'm not sure if there's research that delineates this. I would lend to whatever you prefer. That said, when it comes to choreograph, there's an element of memory. There's an element of kind of planning that can be very helpful. Think of that map, think of that exercise, that can be very helpful. But if you're like me and you have 5 left feet instead of just 2, um, improvised dance is probably going to make you feel better because then you're not going to be ashamed of the way you dance. So whatever whatever works, I think, unless Dr. Laura, if you know differently when it comes to research.
Well, actually, I mean, considering the fact that choreographed dance, okay, this really works into the memorization of complex dance patterns. This boosts hippocampal plasticity, okay? That's essential for memory formation, retention, and so on and so forth. Um, you know, Not to mention that it also engages both the brain and the body in those synchronized movements. Wow, really doing a lot for enunciations today.
We're so
But,
close.
yeah, but research on improvisational dance that suggests that this stimulates the prefrontal cortex. So this is the region in the brain that's involved in decision making and problem solving, making it particularly beneficial for enhancing that cognitive flexibility. So you really are working different aspects of the brain, but honestly, blending both.
Mhm.
You might as well work that, as much of the brain as possible. So
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Very succinct. Um, Sue has popped in. It's more a comment, I think, than a question, and I just want to give incredible accolade to her and Mama Bear. Um, Her mama, who's 101 years old, um, did crossword puzzles. Oh, up until the end. My apologies. Mama who, up until the end was 101, did crossword puzzles and told jokes and did all the fun things. And so was cognitively there, vital until 101. And so Sue's mom, just like my one of my patients, age, like to quote the long lost Aaliyah, right? Age is nothing but a number, and there's an element of society or your own ideas around what aging is limiting. So you're not bound to cognitive decline just because you're ticking away that proverbial clock. All right. Our last question of the evening is from Dirk. Hey, Dirk. And
One of
also
our
we learned your
staples.
sorry. Yeah. Also, we learned your 84. So I think, oh, Monty, I think I might be mixing up numbers now, but we also learned your a beloved older resident who's living their best life in the older ages. All right. Um, so given that there are many sources of inflammation, poor sleep, stress, leaky gut, toxins, et cetera, Lord, the list is too long, that can contribute to bad brain health. In what order should one address and resolve inflammation from each source? My guess is parasites, leaky gut, and diet, sleep toxins, stress, trauma. So if I'm reading this correctly, that you're almost to an extent asking prioritization, and you're not going to like my answer, Dirk, but there's an element of you do need to work with a practitioner. And the reason I'm saying that, right, you need to take into consideration firstly, what is most emergent? If you have a parasitic infection, you probably should be addressing that, right? But separate to that, emergent will look different for different people. So we want to get rid of that low-hanging fruit. And then next, we really want to understand how is the body speaking to us? We do that through lab work. We do that through clinical intake. We do that through examining your genes, right? So we know not only what are the foundational, the blueprint, the DNA weak points there, but separate to that, how are those manifesting? Because I would offer the list for me, the list for Lara, the list for you, that prioritization, by and large, they're all going to be different. Okay. And so I don't want to dismiss your question, but I also really think that medicine to date has done a bad job of being like, here's this one prescription that fits on everyone. And what we're now learning is categorically that's by and large not true. There's some things that are foundational to help health, right? You're going to hear us always talking about sleep and eating your vegetables, but outside of that, there's an incredible element of personalization to where your body is right now. Where your body is today is not where it was 20 years ago. And so the list that was relevant 20 years ago is no longer relevant today. Okay. So just a thought.
And, I would also say start implementing or do the things that you will actually implement. Because no
Hey,
protocol is
okay.
only as good as actually doing it.
Mhm.
So,
We,
yeah.
yeah, yeah, very important. I hope that was helpful. I think we've gotten to the end of our time. For those that joined yesterday, I did promise you very briefly some commentary on music. So for those who are interested, you're very welcome to jump off. For the music nerds, and I already know Dr. Laura is staying because she's a happy little violinist there. Let's just quickly offer a little bit about music and how great it is. So one of the things that I looked in, and I think we'll have to probably elaborate on this more, I'll do that at a different juncture, looked at something called neurologic music therapy. And this is studied in Boston. It's either MIT or Harvard, one of the fancy schools out in Boston, by a Dr. Michael uh, Tout, not saying that right. Apologies, doctor. And he really focuses on neuroscience and how we see sound, music patterns, right, engaging with the brain, right? So to him, it's really important. Once we understand the brain, how can we, and its relationship to music, how can we leverage that for health, right? So one of his big mainstays is the fact that music, unlike many other forms of therapy, will engage many, many, many different parts of the brain all at once. To Dr. Arden's point, when you're dancing, you're incorporating not only sound, but movement within the body, right? So music, even just simply that physically passive act of sitting and listening, right? You're engaging your auditory cortex, you're engaging your motor cortex, right? Which is an interesting one, even though you're sitting and the motor cortex is because of rhythms and patterns within music. You're engaging your prefrontal, so this happy thinking part at the front of your brain, right? Because again, there's an element of we like to predict things. You're always trying to guess where that music's going to go, or maybe you're calling back from memory, right? So that's there, as well as the limbic system, right? Limbic system is really involved in emotions. Think yourself, think about when you fell in love, think about when you were a teenager. Music was so important because that's such a foundational time for the development of emotions. And think about how those songs can bring up that feeling. So it's really neat that music, this beautiful thing we can fill our ears with, right, engages the entirety of our brain. Okay. And so Dr. Tout, along with other people, are really looking at, now that we know the brain is engaged in so many different ways because of this delightful thing, how can we use it? So this evening, for our cognitive and kind of decline, right, there's a few different ways that you can do this. I'm just going to list them in brief, right? So one looks at, and this is, I think, especially for the people on this who spoke to, I have an older someone in my life and maybe their memory is starting to decline and I want to learn memory tools for them. Okay. Think to musical mnemonics, that thing where you're going to associate sound and memory that I can't say, and that's okay. This really looks at so when you're trying to learn something new, maybe a grocery list, or you need to have a new habit, you're trying to learn TikTok, heaven forbid, right? Associating that with a rhythm, with a sound, that can really incorporate better memory. It helps you form those memories better because, again, naturally we're creatures of habit and beauty, and music captures both of those. So, right, if you're trying to learn something, consider putting that to a melody. Okay, that's one thing. There's also something for people who are trying to stay sharp and or further develop their focus and attention. It's called musical attention control training. And so really what you're doing is, and I'd encourage this with the beauty that can be classical music, right? Focusing on something that's not necessarily that has words, but being like, during this piece, I'm going to listen very specifically for the horns, or I'm going to very specifically listen for the cymbals or the drum, or, something that you have awareness around, and following that helps you focus your attention. And that is, as Dr. Varden's been talking about, one of those novel cognitive activities. Okay. The last thing here is musical executive functional training, Monzia. There's a whole host of things that'll sit under this, but really it's Dr. Ryan's point. It's a lot of thinking about problem solving, a little bit of music prediction, a little bit of music memory. If I was writing this, what sort of sound would I want? And this one's a little bit of a hodgepodge. I'd really encourage, there's definitely music therapists out there. You can engage with one of them, but music is this thing that touches on all of the glory of the brain. And it's something that, especially if it's what you love, you can incorporate it into how you go about your aging and how you're going to be dancing out. I think moving forward, we have to have some songs that we can dance out to. But on that happy note, on that glorious note of music and all that it is, thank you so very much for joining us this evening, Dr. Varden Medell. It's so wonderful to have you back. And so thank you very much for journeying through this and sharing. Girl pulled out all of these studies. She's able to reference the specifics. Got a memory I don't have, and that's okay. And I love it. Thank you for donating your memory this evening. We appreciate it.